The funeral flowers were still in the back seat when Kesha saw them. She hadn't even stepped fully out of the car. Above Detroit, the sky hung low and gray, pressing down on the old brick buildings like a lid sealing something already lifeless. Her father had been buried less than 3 hours ago, and yet there they were, Malek and his mother, standing at the entrance of her father's brownstone apartment building, arguing beside a front door that was slightly ajar. Lorraine Booker's voice cut through the damp afternoon air. She told her son to kick the door in, insisting that half of it now belonged to him by law. Kessia froze, wondering if grief was distorting her hearing. Malik hesitated, glancing up and down the empty street, murmuring that they didn't need to handle it that way. Lorraine lowered her voice but sharpened it, saying Kesha was emotional and confused, and that they needed to secure things before someone else did. That word secure shifted something inside Kesha's chest. Not grief, not yet anger, but something colder. As she stepped forward, the scrape of her heel against the concrete made Malik turn. His face drained of color when he saw her. Lorraine spun around, irritation flashing across her features before it vanished, replaced instantly with exaggerated concern. She pressed her palm to her chest and greeted Kesha with feigned warmth, claiming they had been worried sick. Kesha said nothing. She walked past them toward the door. It was unlocked, something her father would never have allowed. Inside, the apartment still carried the scent of sandalwood and old books. The curtains were half drawn, and his armchair sat near the window with its blanket folded neatly over the back. For a fleeting second, she expected to see him, their Colonel Raymond Vance, straight-backed, even in retirement, gray eyes sharp and observant. Instead, another figure stood in the hallway. Commander Elijah Webb, her father's oldest friend, watched silently from within. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark overcoat, he carried a quiet authority. Malik stumbled backward at the sight of him, and Lauren's confident posture faltered. Elijah's voice, though calm, carried weight, as he remarked that they seemed eager. Malik attempted to recover, claiming they were simply ensuring the property was secure. Elijah asked, pointedly, how they planned to secure it. Lorraine insisted. They were family. Elijah studied her for a long moment before responding, that family does not circle before the body is cold. The words struck hard. Kesha felt her throat tighten. She had not cried, not at the graveside, not once, but standing there, seeing them at that door. Something inside her began to fracture. That apartment was more than square footage or brick and timber. It was memory layered over memory. High, crimp-painted ceilings, crown-molding her father restored himself. 2 large bedrooms, hardwood floors that creaked in winter. She learned to ride a bike in the courtyard below. She studied at the dining table beneath the yellow pendant light. She drank tea with her father in the evenings, listening to war stories softened by time. The apartment was sanctuary, power, safety, and now, it felt invaded. Lorraine suggested discussing arrangements, speaking smoothly about the future and insisting Kesha could not handle the place alone. Malik avoided eye contact as he proposed combining households. Lorraine wandered deeper into the living room, brushing her fingers along the carved oak buffet and suggesting that Kesha sell her condo and move in permanently because it was logical. In her mind, Kessia heard her father's warning clearly. That woman is a vulture. That night, after they left, Elijah stayed behind. He poured Tija's tea, as her father would have, and quietly advised her to be careful. When she tried to defend Malik, Elijah revealed that her father had called him a week before his passing and confessed he did not trust them. The statement felt like betrayal. Kesha whispered that Malik was not like that. Elijah did not argue, but he did not agree either. The following morning shattered whatever fragile peace remained. Her father's small steel safe, normally kept locked in the bedroom closet with the key always on his person, had been opened. After the hospital returned his belongings, Malik had insisted on collecting them. Exhausted, she had not objected. That evening she heard the metallic click from the bedroom and found Malik and Lorraine crouched before the opened safe, papers spread across the bed. They claimed they were organizing holding onto the property deed and financial records for safekeeping. Grief made resistance heavy, and she nodded. That was her first mistake. Afterward, the shift was subtle but undeniable. Malik began casually discussing inheritance law, asking whether it counted as community property. She answered automatically that inheritance remained separate. Disappointment flickered across his face. Lorraine intensified her commentary, remarking, on utilities, taxes, and how large the place was for one woman alone. The pressure was steady and persistent, like water carving stone. Then one afternoon, while cleaning, Kessia found a crumpled flyer beneath the couch where Malik always sat. "We buy houses for cash. Closing in 3 days." The words were circled in thick marker. Cold realization spread through her. When she confronted him, he responded not with explanation but accusation, attacking her conscience, deflecting blame, escalating aggression, gaslighting. Her father's warning echoed louder than ever. That night, for the first time since the funeral, she did not cry, she thought, and something inside her changed. That night, Kesha did not sleep, not because of grief, but because of pattern recognition. She lay in her father's bedroom staring at the ceiling where faint cracks spread like branching maps, replaying every word Malik had spoken, every glance Lorraine had exchanged with him, every subtle push disguised as concern. Community, property, sell your condo, too big for one woman. The phrases aligned in her mind like puzzle pieces locking into place. By 3:17 a.m. she understood something fundamental. They were not circling her emotionally. They were positioning themselves legally, and positioning meant planning. Malik had habits, predictable ones. He kept everything he considered important in a single place, an old military footlocker stored on the top shelf of their bedroom closet in the condo. He called it his stash. Important documents, envelopes of cash, car titles, lottery tickets. If he valued it, it went there. And if Lorraine had prepared anything in advance, it would be there too. The next morning, Kesha waited until Malik left for work. She listened to his car pull away, counted to 60, then moved. The condo felt stale and uninhabited when she entered. Dragging a chair to the closet, she pulled down the heavy metal footlocker. It was secured with a small padlock. Sophisticated, her father's voice echoed in memory. A soldier learns to open any lock. She retrieved a thin wire from the garage toolbox. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from confirmation. If she was right, her marriage had already ended. The lock clicked softly. Final. She opened the lid and sifted past fishing magazines and car manuals until she found a blue cardstock folder underneath. Her pulse slowed instead of racing. Panic had been replaced with precision. Inside the folder were documents already prepared. A quitclaim deed, transferring her father's apartment to Malik, a general power of attorney granting him authority over her inheritance, spousal consent forms all prefilled, all waiting for one final element, her signature. At the bottom was a notary stamp, Mr. Daniel Higgins, stamped, sealed, signed. Except the ink looked wrong. Too bright, too clean, not aged. She exhaled slowly. They had not intended to discuss, they had intended to execute. She photographed every page, every seal, every signature, then replaced everything exactly as she had found it. The box was locked again and returned to its precise position. Precision mattered. If Malik suspected, she knew he would adjust, strategize. She needed the full scope of the plan. 3 days later came the second confirmation. Malik had purchased a cheap, prepaid phone, claiming it was for shop calls. He was careless with it, leaving it in his work jacket pocket. One evening, while he showered, she checked it. No passcode. The first message thread was labeled, Mama. The exchange was concise and devastating. Malik asked whether the forms were ready. Lorraine confirmed everything was prepared. He instructed her not to explain details, saying Kesha would sign if she believed it related to probate. They planned to present the papers at a family gathering. The following week, when she would be emotional, Lorraine promised to distract her while Malik guided her hand. She won't read, Lorraine wrote. Where would she go? No daddy, no support, Malik replied. Exactly. The phone nearly slipped from Kesha's fingers. This was not impulsive greed. It was coordinated strategy. They were timing her grief, scheduling her vulnerability, weaponizing her loneliness. Something inside her closed, not dramatically, not loudly, but with the quiet finality of a door shut in. That evening, she behaved normally. She asked Malik about work, listened as Lorraine rambled about groceries, nodded when appropriate, even smiled faintly. Internally, however, she documented everything. How Lorraine's eyes scanned the walls, how Malik avoided eye contact whenever properties surfaced in conversation, how they lowered their voices when she left the room. The transformation was irreversible. She was no longer only a grieving daughter. She was an investigator inside her own marriage. The next day Lorraine arrived unannounced again and suggested Kesha travel south to visit her aunt. Change of scenery. She said Malik and Lorraine could handle the paperwork in her absence. The subtext was unmistakable. They needed her gone, they needed unsupervised access, and they needed speed. Kesha smiled faintly and declined. When Lorraine implied she did not understand legal matters, Kesha replied calmly that she would learn. The temperature in the room shifted. The conflict was no longer theoretical. That night Kesha called Elijah. Her hands were steady. She explained everything without interruption. When she finished, Elijah responded bluntly, calling them then reminded her that her father had anticipated something like this. He had not told her because he did not want her living in fear. He wanted her strong. Elijah instructed her to stay in the apartment, sign nothing, and wait. He was coming. Exactly 1 hour later, the doorbell rang. Elijah entered quietly, removed his coat, and stood before her father's portrait. He saluted softly before turning to her. She showed him the photographs. He examined each image carefully, zooming in on the notary seal. It was fake, he said with certainty. From a small black case he produced compact recording devices and micro cameras, military surplus, reliable equipment. The plan was straightforward. She would leave loudly the next day, announce she would be gone all day, then return quietly using a spare key. She would hide while he monitored from outside. They would not resist temptation. They would expose themselves. Fear tried to rise, but resolve overpowered it. It had mistaken silence for surrender, grief for weakness. That night, standing alone, in the living room, Kessia looked at her father's armchair, the folded blanket, the books lining the shelves. She whispered that she would not let them take it. For the first time since the funeral, what she felt was not sorrow or rage, but focus, the kind her father carried into battle, the kind that wins wars quietly. The next morning felt unreal, quiet, too deliberate. Keisha stood in the hallway of her father's apartment with her phone pressed to her ear, making sure her voice carried clearly. She told Malik she was going to the cemetery and then to Taisha's place, that she would not be back until late. There was a pause before his carefully measured sympathy came through the line, telling her to take her time and rest. She could almost sense Lorraine listening in the background, calculating. Keisha ended the call, walked heavily to the door, closed it loudly, locked it, and allowed her footsteps to echo down the stairwell on purpose. Outside, she circled the block twice, heart hammering, before slipping back inside with her spare key. The apartment absorbed her silence. Elijah's recording devices were already active. She moved quickly into her father's bedroom and concealed herself behind the heavy velvet curtains near the window, breathing shallowly as she waited. It took less than an hour. A car door slammed in the courtyard below. Voices followed, then footsteps, then the key turning in the lock. The door opened. Lorraine whispered sharply, asking if Kesha was there. Malik assured her she had left. The door shut, and movement filled the apartment, drawers opening, cabinets shifting, papers disturbed. Lorraine demanded they find the will. Malik insisted there wasn't one. Lorraine snapped that old soldiers did not die without paperwork. Books were pulled from shelves, documents scattered, her father's belongings handled carelessly. Kesha pressed her fist to her mouth to remain silent. Then came the sentence that removed all remaining doubt. If he had left everything to Cassia, Lorraine hissed, their power of attorney would be useless. Malik murmured about Plan B. Lorraine exhaled and outlined it coldly at the family gathering the next day. While Kesha was emotional, they would present the papers, guide her hand, send her away to recover, and then sell. The words were clear, deliberate, rehearsed. They were not improvising, they were executing a script. Something inside Kesha went completely still. Not rage, not sorrow, steel. After another 20 minutes of searching, Lorraine muttered that Kesha must not read before they left. The door closed, silence returned. 10 long minutes later, Kesha stepped out from behind the curtain. Her hands shook not from fear, but from the release of uncertainty. She called Elijah. He confirmed from outside that he had captured everything. Crystal clear. The war was not over, but doubt was. The following evening, the apartment filled with relatives offering condolences, murmuring softly, carrying casseroles and bottles of cheap whiskey. The atmosphere was thick with performative grief. Lorraine moved through the room like a bereaved matriarch, Malik poured drinks and touched shoulders, playing the devoted husband. Kessia stood near the mantel beneath her father's portrait, composed and watchful, dressed in black with her hair pulled back tightly. The moment came after most guests had departed. Only close family remained. Lorraine sat beside her, speaking gently about probate and filings, insisting Kessia should not handle paperwork alone. Malik stepped forward holding the familiar blue folder. He placed it carefully on the coffee table and opened it to reveal the power of attorney, the quitclaim deed, and the consent forms. His finger indicated where she should sign. Lorraine leaned closer, invoking family and trust. The room seemed to constrict. The air grew heavy. Kesha picked up the pen, her hand trembling convincingly. Malik leaned in, almost smiling, as victory hovered within reach. The pen hovered above the paper. Then the doorbell rang sharp and unexpected. Lorraine stiffened. Kesha calmly set the pen down and walked to the door. Elijah stood outside. Behind him were a uniformed detective and a suited notary holding a briefcase. Elijah asked evenly whether they were interrupting. Inside, silence fell. Elijah entered first, followed by the detective. The notary introduced himself as Samuel Clough, a licensed notary public, and announced they were present regarding the will of Colonel Raymond Vance. Lorraine insisted there was no will. Elijah responded coldly that there was. The notary opened a sealed envelope and began reading. Raymond Vance, being of sound mind, left all property, personal and real, to his only daughter, Kesha Vance. He appointed Elijah Webb as executor and instructed him explicitly to protect his daughter from fraudulent actions by her husband and his mother. The words struck the room with finality. Loren's fingers gripped the armchair. Malik stared at the floor. Elijah then opened his laptop and calmly explained that the previous day they had visited the apartment believing it empty. He pressed play. Their recorded voices filled the room, clear, undeniable, incriminating. Statements about selling, ensuring she would not read, shipping her off. Next came the photographs of the forged documents and the screenshots of text messages. Each piece of evidence presented methodically, like a prosecution building its case. The detective stepped forward and informed them that conspiracy to commit real estate fraud constituted a felony. Lorraine protested weakly that they had not done anything yet. The detective replied that preparation was sufficient. Malik offered no defense. He simply looked diminished, deflated, exposed. The man who once promised protection now stood revealed as a predator. The detective instructed them to stand. Lorraine attempted one final performance, clutching her chest and claiming she felt faint. The detective responded flatly that she could see a medic at the station. They were escorted out. The door closed behind them. Silence returned to the apartment, heavy and permanent. Kessia stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by scattered papers beneath her father's portrait. Elijah approached quietly and said it was done. She swallowed and answered softly that it was not done. It was only beginning. Victory did not arrive like firework. It arrived as silence, deep, ringing silence that settled into the brownstone apartment long after the courtroom emptied. That first night after everything concluded, Kesha sat alone in the living room, where so much had unfolded. The walls that once symbolized protection now felt heavy with history. The war was over, but wars leave debris inside the soul. Tasha arrived without announcement, carrying groceries in one hand and wine in the other. She declared there would be no speeches and that the objective for the evening was stabilization. She cooked, filled the apartment with casual conversation, work, gossip, strange clients, disastrous dates. She deliberately avoided mentioning Court Malik or Lorenche, simply restored life to the space. Slowly, the numbness inside Kesha cracked. For the first time since the funeral, she cried, not dramatically, not loudly, but with quiet release. When she confessed that she felt empty, Tasha called it good. Emptiness meant the toxic residue had drained away. That night, Kesha slept deeply, without dreams or fear. Weeks passed. Probation began for the Bookers. Restitution payments were structured, yet Kesha recognized a deeper truth. Remaining in Detroit meant remaining on the battlefield. She did not need escape. She needed reset. She called Tasha and said she was selling the apartment. Memories, she realized, were not contained in walls. The brownstones sold quickly, historic charm, prime location, strong value. She sorted through her father's belongings with care. Some items were donated, some preserved, some kept close. In a final drawer she discovered his diary. The last entry stopped her breath. He had asked Elijah to protect her, but had written that she must ultimately learn to protect herself and that she needed strength. She closed the diary and whispered that she had done exactly that. The move to Brooklyn felt like oxygen after confinement, a smaller apartment with bright windows overlooking a park, noise, movement, life. She secured a position at a research library, surrounded again by rare books and the quiet dignity of preserved history. Routine restored structure to her days. Gradually, she rebuilt not as a victim but as an architect of her own stability. Julian worked in the archive department, soft-spoken, observant, secure, in ways Malik had never been. He listened fully when she spoke, asked about her ideas, her ambitions. When he first took her hand in the park, it did not feel like possession. It felt like partnership. He assured her there was no rush. She responded that she did not need rushing. Their connection was simple, healthy, stable, the kind her father would have respected. Malik called once from a blocked number. He claimed he had been wrong and that he loved her. He told him calmly that it was too late and blocked him permanently. There was no anger left, only closure. Later, Elijah informed her that Malik had unraveled, lost employment, lost housing, turned to alcohol. Loren's health deteriorated under stress. Consequences rarely arrive with spectacle. They erode slowly and thoroughly. Kesha felt no satisfaction, only distance. Years passed. As years inevitably do, Kesha and Julian married. They had a daughter, Marina, named after her mother. They purchased a home upstate, with a porch, a garden, and lights spilling across wooden floors. Kessia eventually left the library and opened an antique bookstore, a quiet cultural space hosting lectures, writers, and community gatherings. Her son, from her first marriage, born shortly after the divorce, grew into a thoughtful young man. Julian became his father in every meaningful way. Trust rebuilt itself brick by brick, not rushed, not forced, but earned. One evening years later, Kessia reopened the old court folder and read her testimony. She saw the frightened yet resolute woman she had once been and felt unexpected respect. That version of herself had stood alone against betrayal and humiliation and refused to bend. The foundation of her current life had been poured in that crucible. At dinner one night, her son mentioned he had given a presentation about resilience and had used her as the example. When she asked why, he answered simply that she had not only survived, she had rebuilt. Julian squeezed her hand under the table as her daughter laughed over broccoli. The house felt warm, alive, protected. Later, standing alone on the porch, beneath a quiet sky, she thought of her father, his diary, his concern, his enduring love, love that had outlived death, love that had reinforced her spine when it mattered most. She whispered into the night that he had been right. She had become a warrior, but she was no longer fighting. She was living, and that was the true victory.